Welcome back to our channel. Today, we drift into the haunting story of one of history's most catastrophic events, the last day of Pompeii, where the lives of Romans were frozen forever by the fury of Mount Vesuvius. Before we journey into the streets, homes, and lives of a city lost in time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating history stories and untold secrets from the past. Let's step back in time and witness the frozen moment that changed history forever. The morning of August 24th, 79 AD, unfolded over Pompeii with the kind of ordinary calm that made the city seem eternal, as if the stones themselves had memorized the footsteps of generations and the laughter of children, and had no intention of ever forgetting. Dawn arrived in soft, warm colors, spilling over the Bay of Naples with a gentle touch, caressing the terracotta rooftops, the marble columns of temples, the stone facades of shops, and the mosaics that paved the streets. In the early hours, the city was already stirring with the first signs of human activity. Bakers had begun to light fires in their ovens, coaxing the dough into golden perfection, the smell of warm bread wafting into the streets, mingling with the scent of oil and wine that merchants were preparing for the day. The city's inhabitants, ranging from wealthy patricians to the poorest laborers, moved through their routines with a sense of purpose, each step carrying them toward their own ambitions, joys, and duties, oblivious to the silent giant that loomed beyond the horizon. In the narrow streets, women in long, flowing stolas carried baskets of fresh produce, balancing them carefully as they made their way to the market, calling greetings to neighbors, friends, and fellow traders. The marketplace, the heart of Pompeii, already hummed with life. Merchants, some with wagons laden with olives, figs, and grapes, others with delicate pottery or bronze trinkets, arranged their goods with careful precision. Shoppers bargained animatedly, their voices rising and falling like music. The clinking of coins mingled with the laughter of children who darted between legs, playing games with sticks and stones, their carefree energy a stark contrast to the seriousness of their elders. Farmers spoke with customers about the quality of the day's catch or the freshness of milk, and bakers, pleased with the smell of freshly baked bread, invited patrons to sample their warm loaves. Wine sellers, their amphorae shining in the morning sun, called out their wares, offering sweet Falernian wine, prized across the region. Smoke curled from chimneys, drifting lazily into the sky, carrying with it a sense of domesticity and comfort. The streets of Pompeii were more than thoroughfares. They were arteries of human life, where the rich and poor, the free and enslaved, intersected and moved together in a rhythm shaped by centuries of Roman civilization. Nobles walked past modest homes, adorned in their finely dyed tunics, sandals carefully laced, hair styled with oils and combs, while servants followed, carrying the family's belongings or tending to children. Dogs barked from chained posts, alerting their owners to visitors or intruders, and the occasional donkey or mule trudged along, loaded with goods, their hooves clattering against the cobblestones. The architecture itself was a testament to Roman ingenuity and taste. Houses with atriums open to the sky, fountains gurgling in central courtyards, mosaics depicting scenes from myth or daily life, and walls adorned with vibrant frescoes that celebrated gods, heroes, and the pleasures of living. Even the humblest dwelling contained traces of art, evidence of a society that valued beauty and cultural expression in every aspect of life. Pompeii was not merely a city of commerce or architecture. It was a city of human stories. Children played in the shadows of temples dedicated to Jupiter, Venus, and Apollo, their laughter mingling with the tolling of bells and the calls of vendors. Mothers guided toddlers along crowded streets, holding their hands tightly, while older children darted ahead to friends and neighbors, eager for games or chores. Fathers oversaw workshops where smiths hammered bronze into tools or ornaments, and carpenters shaped timber into furniture or frames for homes. Artisans added finishing touches to pottery, carefully painting scenes of gods and mortals, animals, and geometric designs, each one a small masterpiece intended to please the eye and serve practical purposes. The city's bathhouses began to fill with early risers, the sound of water running over stone floors blending with murmurs of conversation, while men and women prepared for the social rituals that Roman life demanded, discussions of business, philosophy, politics, and the latest gossip, all occurring within the steamy comfort of communal pools. For the people of Pompeii, life was defined by routine, tradition, and the pursuit of daily pleasures, small and large. Food was central to social life. Bread, olives, wine, and fish formed the basis of many meals, while families gathered in their homes to eat together, recounting the events of the day or discussing the next. Some dined in public taverns, enjoying simple dishes, while the wealthy hosted banquets that displayed both extravagance and status. The sound of music could be heard in courtyards and theaters alike, where lyres, flutes, and drums accompanied dances and performances. Religion was woven into every aspect of life, with offerings made to household gods, lairs and penates, while the temples of the city received ceremonies from priests and devotees, who believed that the favor of the gods could influence health, harvests, and fortune. Education, too, was valued. Children of wealthier families studied rhetoric, philosophy, and mathematics, guided by tutors, while apprentices learned trades from masters, continuing the cycle of knowledge and craft that sustained Pompeii's prosperity. Yet, despite this apparent stability, the city bore subtle marks of the restless earth beneath it. For days, there had been small tremors, earthquakes that rattled windows and shook rooftops. The citizens, accustomed to the occasional movement of the ground, had largely dismissed them as inconsequential. A few merchants repaired minor cracks in walls, and builders inspected foundations, but no one anticipated that these tremors were the whispers of a far more profound upheaval. Mount Vesuvius, the great mountain that shadowed the city, remained silent above them, a distant presence, almost serene in its permanence. To the people, it was part of the landscape, a familiar sentinel that had stood through generations, its slopes dotted with vegetation and occasionally livestock grazing. They trusted it, or at least they ignored its potential danger, believing that the mountain was a benign neighbor, incapable of violence. In the streets, everyday life continued unabated. Children chased one another around corners and through alleyways, their laughter echoing off walls. Women carried jars of water from public fountains, filling the ornate basins that decorated the city. Markets overflowed with produce from nearby farms, plump olives, fragrant herbs, ripe figs, and clusters of grapes ready for harvest. Merchants called out prices, offering deals and free samples, engaging in verbal duels of persuasion with buyers who bartered skillfully in return. Street performers added color and entertainment. Musicians plucked strings and played flutes, acrobats tumbled and leaped, and storytellers recounted tales of gods and heroes, captivating both young and old. Dogs scampered in and out of alleys, chasing birds or small prey, while cats slinked along walls, eyeing the activity with a practiced detachment. The city, despite its density, felt alive with energy, a complex ecosystem of human interaction, trade, and culture. The soundscape of Pompeii was as vibrant as its visual splendor. The clatter of wheels over cobblestones, the murmur of conversation, the laughter of children, the calls of merchants, and the occasional shout of a frustrated vendor formed a symphony of urban life. From the higher terraces and rooftops, the distant hum of the sea added a constant undertone, while the gulls and other birds that circled the city contributed sporadic cries, reminding all who heard them of the larger world beyond the streets and walls. Inside homes, the flickering of oil lamps and the smoke of cooking fires created warmth and motion, a contrast to the cooler morning air, carrying aromas that mingled with the open-air smells of the streets, blending domesticity with commerce in a seamless expression of urban vitality. And through all of this, Mount Vesuvius remained, silent, towering, and ever-present. Its presence was a part of daily life, a backdrop for commerce, conversation, and ceremony, yet there was an unknowable weight to it, a latent energy that no one could see, smell, or feel with certainty. Farmers who tilled the slopes of its lower reaches often whispered tales of small earthquakes or strange smoke in the distance, but the city largely ignored these signs. The mountain had been silent for generations. It had not erupted in living memory. It had no reason, in the minds of Pompeii's citizens, to disrupt their thriving, ordered, and beautiful existence, and so life continued with its intricate dance of people, markets, rituals, and routines, a city utterly unaware of the catastrophic transformation that awaited it. The morning drew on, and the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across streets lined with stone columns, villa gardens blooming with flowers, and courtyards filled with statues of gods and heroes. The sounds of life persisted, the hammering of a blacksmith, the laughter of a child as she chased a puppy, the chatter of women exchanging news and gossip, the splashing of water in the baths, the calls of merchants peddling spices, fruits, and fish. Everything seemed eternal, immutable, and safe. The people of Pompeii believed they would see the evening, then tomorrow, then the day after, and yet none could have imagined that this seemingly ordinary morning would be their last. Beneath their feet, however, the mountain waited. Deep in its hidden chambers, molten rock stirred, and gases accumulated. The earth whispered its warning through tremors and subtle shifts, yet no one understood the language it spoke. And so the city went about its business, trading, arguing, laughing, cooking, praying, its vitality a stark contrast to the unseen forces that lay dormant, waiting for the moment to transform Pompeii from a bustling, vibrant city into a memory frozen under ash. The morning of August 24th, 79 AD, in Pompeii was ordinary in its sights, sounds, and smells. It was ordinary in its routines, its commerce, and its human drama. It was ordinary in every conceivable way. And that ordinariness made what happened next all the more unimaginable. Because ordinary life, as the people of Pompeii knew it, was about to be shattered forever, replaced by silence, ash, and the haunting forms of lives abruptly ended, preserved for millennia beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. The morning of Pompeii's last day had already unfolded in ordinary rhythm, but as the sun climbed higher into the sky, a subtle change began to whisper across the city, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. At first, it was nothing more than a shift in the air, a heaviness that pressed down upon rooftops and plazas, an almost imperceptible tremor beneath the cobblestones. The city continued its business, merchants calling out their wares, children chasing one another through alleys, and women carrying baskets of fruits, vegetables, and jars of water from the fountains. But beneath their feet, a force far greater than the bustle of human life was stirring. Deep within Mount Vesuvius, the earth was awakening after centuries of silence, its inner chambers beginning to roil with molten rock and gas. Though no one in Pompeii knew it, the mountain, which had once been dormant and reassuring, was preparing to demonstrate its immense and terrifying power. For the citizens, life carried on with the same carelessness and familiarity with which it always had. Merchants arranged pottery on wooden stands in the market, the glint of sunlight on painted amphorae catching the eye of passers-by. Bakers slid freshly baked bread from the ovens onto wooden shelves, the aroma drifting into the streets like a warm, invisible hand coaxing people to linger. Children's laughter echoed from one street to the next, their games oblivious to the tremors beneath their feet. Even the priests, tending to their daily rituals and offerings, noticed only the faint quiver in temple steps, and, being a people accustomed to small, seismic events, they dismissed it as another minor jolt from the restless earth. Yet the tremors were not random. They were the mountain's first whispers of awakening, subtle messages that had gone unnoticed for generations. The ground's movement was a prelude, a warning written in vibration and pressure, telling of the immense upheaval gathering beneath the city. Deep inside Vesuvius, magma churned and gases accumulated, building an almost unthinkable pressure. Rocks that had been trapped for centuries, molten and eager for release, began their slow, inevitable journey toward eruption. Though invisible to the human eye, the mountain's insidious processes were already shaping the fate of Pompeii, setting into motion a chain of events that would render life there forever frozen. It began subtly. A thin wisp of smoke, barely perceptible against the blue sky, rose from the mountain's summit. At first, the smoke was white, almost innocent, drifting lazily like clouds that had wandered too close to the peak. Shepherds tending their flocks on the lower slopes noticed it, pointing and whispering to one another, curiosity tempered by a practiced understanding of the mountain's moods. It was nothing, they thought. Perhaps the wind carried ash from some distant land, or a fire had broken out somewhere on the mountain. Yet the wisp thickened, coiling and twisting, taking on shades of gray, and then darker as it rose into the sky. The sun's warmth began to struggle against it, the brilliant morning light dimming as the ash began to filter down, dusting roofs, pavements, and the people below. At first, it was an oddity rather than a threat. Children stopped their games to gaze upward, their mouths open in awe. Merchants paused, looking skyward, puzzled by the strange shadow passing over their shops and stalls. Dogs barked, uneasy at the unusual sight. A few elderly citizens shook their heads, recalling tales told by their parents of tremors and eruptions in distant lands, stories of mountains that had rumbled and then fallen silent again. Some feared nothing, certain in the permanence of their city, its walls, its gods, and its traditions. Yet others felt unease creep into their hearts, a small, cold trickle of instinctive dread that whispered, "Something is wrong." The ash began to fall more persistently. Initially, it was light, almost delicate, drifting through the air in a lazy snow of gray and white flakes. People brushed it from their tunics, annoyed but not alarmed. Bakers shook it off loaves of bread. Merchants swept it from their goods. Children ran through it, catching flakes on their hands and faces with the giddy curiosity of youth. But soon, the snow of ash thickened, turning the day into an unnatural twilight. Shadows lengthened even though the sun hung high, and the light of Pompeii became dim and eerie, casting everything in a gray haze that blurred the sharp edges of marble columns, tiled floors, and painted frescoes. The scent of sulfur and burning stone began to infiltrate the air, a sharp tang that made throats sting and eyes water. Pumice stones followed next. Lighter than ordinary rock but sharp and abrasive, they began to fall from the sky, bouncing on rooftops, smashing against walls, and crunching underfoot. Farmers carrying baskets of produce ran for shelter, scattering their goods in panic. Merchants abandoned their stalls, clutching valuables in haste as the first signs of disaster became impossible to ignore. Children screamed, mothers called out, fathers shouted in vain to organize families or herd animals. Even the streets themselves, so familiar, became treacherous, littered with jagged stones, overturned carts, and the debris of commerce and routine. The city, once vibrant with life, was beginning to collapse into chaos. Some sought refuge in their homes, locking doors and windows, hoping that the stone walls would shield them from the falling stones. Others ran to the city gates, desperate to escape, only to find the streets clogged with people all moving in panic, their desperation feeding a terrifying collective energy. Dogs barked frantically, horses reared, and birds rose into the sky in flocks, fleeing the unnatural storm. Those who attempted to help others found themselves hindered by the sheer weight of the crowd, the sudden transformation of familiar streets into a labyrinth of danger, and the persistent, growing avalanche of pumice and ash. And then the air changed, it thickened and became suffocating. Breathing became difficult, even for those who had been quick to seek shelter. The dust and ash infiltrated lungs, sticking to the mucous membranes, causing coughs and panic-driven gasps for air. Eyes burned, stinging from the fine particles that coated eyelashes, eyelids, and skin. The sun disappeared entirely, swallowed by the massive ash cloud rising from the mountain. In the darkness, Pompeii appeared to be experiencing night in the middle of day, an unnatural shadow stretching across streets, plazas, and homes. The city's inhabitants, once so confident in the permanence of their routines, could feel the first true tremors of terror settling in their minds. Families huddled together, clutching children, dragging elders, and fleeing in desperation. Some people cried aloud to the gods, throwing themselves in supplication toward temples, as if divine intervention could halt the fury of nature itself. Merchants abandoned wealth, artisans left tools behind, and servants sought the safety of homes where they had worked for years. Yet safety was an illusion. The ash continued to fall relentlessly, piling up on rooftops, clogging streets, and making every step treacherous. The clatter of stones, the screams of the people, and the groans of timber and masonry under the growing weight created a cacophony, a soundtrack to the unfolding disaster that few could comprehend in its enormity. Amid this chaos, the character of Pompeii itself began to change. The vibrant marketplace, once bustling with negotiation and the smell of fresh food, was transformed into a gray wasteland. The elegant villas, with their frescoes, fountains, and mosaics, were dusted in a layer of powdery ash that dulled their colors. Animals wandered blindly, some injured, some panicked, adding to the city's chaos. The people, accustomed to the rhythms of commerce, religion, and social life, found themselves confronted with the raw, indiscriminate force of nature, and for the first time, many recognized that their city was vulnerable. Yet even in the face of such extraordinary events, life continued in its stubborn, human way. Some parents shielded children beneath cloaks, carrying them across streets littered with stones. Others tried to calm animals, guiding them toward safety. Merchants clutched coins and jars of wine, more out of habit than expectation of survival. Priests continued to utter prayers, though the words were almost drowned in the roar of falling pumice and the grinding weight of ash. Human beings, it seemed, could not abandon their routines entirely, even as the mountain's awakening accelerated and the normal rhythms of life were transformed into a desperate scramble for survival. The mountain itself was growing louder. From within its ancient chambers, the rumble of magma moving and gas escaping was becoming a resonant roar, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very air and stone. The smoke and ash rising from the summit thickened into a dark, swirling column, towering into the heavens, twisting and turning in the wind. Lightning, born from the friction of particles within the column, occasionally cracked across the sky, illuminating the city below in harsh, flickering light. It was a terrifying and beautiful spectacle, a glimpse into forces far beyond human comprehension. Some citizens watched in awe, others in horror, realizing that the mountain, once a benign neighbor, was now a threat beyond imagination. The falling pumice became heavier. Roofs began to sag under the growing weight. Narrow alleyways, once passages of easy movement, turned into traps as stones and ash piled high. People attempted to escape through gates, but streets were crowded, stones underfoot shifting and tripping feet, and panic spreading faster than any individual could run. The city, with all its beauty, culture, and human energy, was being overwhelmed by the slow but unstoppable advance of nature. Every breath became a labor. Every step was dangerous. Every glance upward revealed the sheer scale of the eruption, the column of smoke and ash blotting out the sun, signaling the unstoppable momentum of a force that would soon define the end of Pompeii. In these first hours, the city of Pompeii teetered between routine and catastrophe. The ordinary morning, with its bread, markets, and laughter, had been replaced by a surreal nightmare, a city caught in transition between life and destruction. Some families sought shelter in homes and courtyards, others continued to flee, carrying their children and possessions as fast as they could. Priests continued to pray, their voices thin against the roar of the mountain, while animals panicked and street performers abandoned their art. The mountain was awakening fully, the tremors stronger, the ash heavier, and the air thick with sulfur. Every familiar sight and sound was being transformed by the eruption, every step on the cobblestones fraught with danger, every breath tainted with smoke and dust. It was the calm within chaos that defined Pompeii's last hours of normalcy, a fleeting moment in which the people of the city still acted according to their routines, even as the forces of nature gathered above them, preparing for the event that would freeze them in time forever. The morning of August 24th, 79 AD, had begun with ordinary rhythms, but by the time the sun reached its zenith, Pompeii was no longer recognizable as the city it had been hours before. The faint tremors that had gone mostly unnoticed earlier had intensified, and now the air was thick with ash, dust, and the faint but pungent odor of sulfur. The sky above had turned a deep, ominous gray, as if night had fallen prematurely, swallowing the city in an unnatural gloom. Shadows stretched across streets and plazas, casting familiar buildings and fountains into a ghostly light, while the sun, though still high, seemed to fight a losing battle against the overwhelming darkness that Vesuvius had unleashed. The city's daily life, so vibrant in the morning, was being transformed into a nightmare in which every step, every breath, and every decision carried the weight of survival. People ran through the streets, some clutching children, others dragging elderly relatives, while merchants abandoned their stalls, leaving goods scattered across cobblestones now slippery with ash and pumice. The sudden fall of heavier pumice stones made rooftops tremble and collapse, sending showers of debris onto the city below. The deafening clatter of falling stones, mingled with the terrified screams of men, women, and children, created a symphony of chaos that echoed off the marble columns, stone facades, and narrow alleyways. Dogs barked and howled, tethered to posts or roaming freely, their panicked movements adding to the confusion, while horses and donkeys struggled under the weight of carts, often bucking and breaking free in terror. Birds, disturbed by the smoke and ash, rose in flocks, their frantic cries cutting through the tumult, a stark reminder of the natural world's awareness of danger. Parents shielded children under cloaks, their hands trembling as they carried them across streets, crowded with people all moving in a single chaotic flow toward the city gates. Mothers held infants tight, whispering frantic prayers to gods whose faces they could not see, while fathers tried desperately to guide their families past the debris, balancing urgency with caution. Some stumbled over loose stones, falling prone under the weight of ash, while others collided with panicked neighbors, sending children tumbling and sending belongings scattering. The city, once a carefully organized network of streets, markets, and homes, had become a treacherous maze of danger, its familiar paths now threatening obstacles. The ash, once light and drifting, now fell in dense layers, blanketing the streets, rooftops, and plazas. Each flake, small and seemingly harmless, accumulated rapidly, forming a thickening blanket that made movement increasingly difficult. Breathing became laborious as fine particles entered lungs, causing coughs, gagging, and wheezing, while eyes burned and streamed tears. The suffocating atmosphere forced people to shield their faces with cloth, their tunics, or their arms, but even this offered only partial relief. The more they struggled to escape, the more they inhaled, and the more their lungs protested the intrusion of nature's deadly gift. In the marketplace, the vibrant energy of morning trade had vanished entirely. Stalls of olives, grapes, fish, and pottery lay abandoned, goods crushed beneath the falling stones and ash. Merchants tried to salvage what they could, clutching coins or fragile amphorae, but the urgency of survival soon overrode any concern for wealth or possessions. The calls and negotiations that had once filled the plaza were replaced by screams and cries of terror. Children cried for their parents, parents called out for their children, and strangers became temporary companions in the shared desperation of survival. The bonds of daily routine had been replaced by instinctive reactions, as each person attempted to navigate the shifting dangers of collapsing roofs, thickening ash, and surging crowds. Rooftops began to fail under the weight of accumulating pumice and ash. Tile and wood collapsed, sometimes burying those who sought shelter beneath them. The sound of roofs caving in, mingled with shouts and falling stones, created a relentless, oppressive noise that seemed to press down on the survivors from all directions. People attempting to enter homes for protection found doors blocked by debris, windows shattered by the falling rocks, and courtyards choked with ash. The city's architecture, once a source of stability and pride, had become a trap, offering only temporary refuge before surrendering to the inexorable force of the mountain. Some citizens tried to escape through the city gates, hoping to reach the countryside beyond Pompeii. But the streets were congested with the panicked flow of thousands. People tripped over debris, stumbled on the uneven paving stones, and collided with one another in the frantic bid for freedom. Horses pulling carts became unmanageable, kicking and trampling anyone in their path. The narrow alleyways that had once offered shortcuts now funneled terrified citizens into bottlenecks, creating situations where survival depended not only on speed and determination, but also on chance. Families clung together, navigating through strangers as tightly packed as sardines, while the ash continued to thicken, obscuring vision and making every step uncertain. Those who sought refuge inside homes or shops found mixed fortune. Some managed to shelter in courtyards or rooms, but the weight of pumice and stones eventually caused roofs to buckle, spilling debris onto the floor and crushing those who had thought themselves safe. Inside, the air was thick and unbreathable, and panic often overtook reason. Mothers clutched children, husbands held wives, and servants shielded masters, all in a desperate attempt to preserve life. Yet even the strongest structures could not withstand the relentless assault, and soon walls and ceilings began to crack and collapse, transforming safe havens into tombs. Amidst the chaos, some sought to maintain semblances of normality. Priests continued to pray, their voices hoarse from shouting and smoke, filled air as they performed hurried rites, hoping that the gods might spare the city. Street performers abandoned their art but clutched instruments or props, as if they might offer comfort in some inexplicable way. Merchants instinctively sought to protect their wealth, clutching coins, amphorae, or small valuables, while some artisans attempted to rescue tools or goods, driven by habit and instinct more than rational thought. Every attempt to impose order against the overwhelming chaos was ultimately futile, swallowed by the scale and inevitability of the eruption. The mountain, meanwhile, was fully awake. The column of smoke and ash rose higher into the sky, dark and twisting, throwing shadows across Pompeii that deepened the sense of unnatural twilight. Friction within the column produced lightning, jagged bolts that illuminated the chaos for brief, terrifying moments. The sound of the eruption was deafening, a constant, omnipresent roar that seemed to shake the air and reverberate through the stone streets. The vibrations from the mountain made the earth feel alive beneath the citizens' feet, adding to the sensation that the city itself was participating in the destruction, collapsing and shifting as though conscious of the terror it bore witness to. As the day wore on, the ash became thicker and heavier, settling in layers that made each step more laborious. The city's fountains, which had provided cool water and a point of social gathering, became clogged with pumice. Streets and alleys filled with falling stones and debris, the very thoroughfares of human life transformed into obstacles of mortality. People who had once taken pride in their homes, gardens, and public spaces now moved through ruins, forming in real time their familiar city changing into a surreal, suffocating landscape. Shadows cast by collapsing rooftops and falling stones created illusions of movement and threat, adding to the confusion and terror that gripped the population. Families huddled together wherever they could find temporary safety. Mothers pressed infants to their chests, whispering prayers and promises, while fathers held wives and children, guiding them through streets now coated with a gray, gritty blanket of ash. Some tried to carry belongings, others abandoned them entirely. Pets, too, suffered, dogs strained against leashes, their whines echoing through the streets, while birds trapped in courtyards and rooftops flapped desperately, adding to the cacophony. The instinct for survival became the dominant force, overriding all other human concerns, including comfort, status, and propriety. Amid this chaos, Pompeii's cultural and religious life struggled to persist. Priests and temple servants attempted to offer prayers and sacrifices, their gestures frantic, hoping that their devotion might appease the gods. Statues of deities, once central to civic and private worship, now appeared helpless and silent, watching over a city unraveling before them. Families turned to prayer in their homes, burning oils or incense as they had done for generations, seeking divine protection that could not come. Even in the face of the unrelenting eruption, humanity persisted in its rituals, a testament to the enduring, if futile, faith that had defined Pompeii for centuries. The city's infrastructure, too, began to fail. Streets clogged with debris made movement difficult or impossible. Buildings cracked under the combined weight of ash, pumice, and structural failure. Water channels and fountains, essential to hygiene and life, were buried or contaminated. The once thriving marketplace, heart of commerce and social life, became a labyrinth of destruction, littered with broken amphorae, scattered coins, and the remnants of hastily abandoned goods. Every familiar landmark, the forum, the baths, the theaters, the bakeries, was transformed into a perilous landscape, a cityscape in which every object, every step, and every breath posed a potential threat. The human cost became increasingly evident. People collapsed in the streets, overcome by exhaustion, suffocation, or injury. Children clung to parents who could not carry them any further, while some elders succumbed to fear, unable to navigate the chaos. Panic multiplied as individuals realized that there was no easy escape. The density of the streets, combined with the relentless fall of pumice and ash, created a situation in which movement, though necessary, was hazardous, and hesitation could mean death. The collective panic of the city amplified every individual struggle, creating a feedback loop of fear, confusion, and desperation. Even animals, normally attuned to survival instincts, were not spared. Donkeys, horses, and livestock bolted through crowded streets, sometimes trampling humans in their flight. Birds took to the sky in frantic flocks, only to be forced down by the ash-laden wind or disoriented by the darkness. Dogs yelped, fought against restraints, or fled through streets where escape was impossible. Nature itself seemed to echo the chaos of the human experience, as every element of Pompeii, people, animals, and infrastructure, was overwhelmed by the mountain's awakening. The psychological strain was immense. People shouted, cried, and prayed, voices rising and falling in desperate waves. Rational thought gave way to instinctive action. Families separated in the confusion, strangers clung together, and social hierarchy evaporated in the face of immediate threat. Fear, so palpable that it seemed almost a physical presence, mingled with smoke, ash, and the relentless roar of Vesuvius. Every sense was assaulted, the eyes by darkness and dust, the ears by chaos and clatter, the lungs by suffocating ash, and the mind by the overwhelming realization that the city's familiar order had vanished in hours. As the afternoon approached, the first signs of structural collapse became unavoidable. Roofs caved under the weight of accumulated pumice and ash. Walls cracked, buildings shuddered, and in some cases, entire structures toppled, burying those seeking refuge inside. Streets were blocked, routes that had been safe for generations transformed into lethal obstacles. Even the strongest buildings, adorned with frescoes and marble, succumbed to the weight, demonstrating the futility of human construction against the overwhelming force of nature. Yet amidst the terror, acts of courage and compassion appeared. Some citizens carried children over obstacles, helping neighbors escape. Servants protected masters, strangers aided the injured, and families stayed together, refusing to leave anyone behind. These moments of human resilience contrasted sharply with the destruction surrounding them, highlighting the interplay between human determination and the inexorable power of the eruption. Every action was small against the scale of the disaster, but each represented a flicker of life and agency in a world that had become dangerously unpredictable. By mid-afternoon, the eruption had transformed Pompeii entirely. Streets were coated with ash, debris littered every corner, and visibility was reduced to mere feet. The sun's light, filtered through the thickening clouds, created an otherworldly glow that illuminated the city in shifting shades of gray. Every familiar sound was distorted: the cries of children, the shouts of parents, the clatter of stones, the groaning of timber and masonry, and the relentless roar of Vesuvius blended into a continuous, oppressive chorus. Pompeii, a city that had thrived for centuries, was now a landscape dominated by chaos, fear, and imminent destruction. In those final hours before the ultimate surge of the eruption, the city's inhabitants faced a terrifying truth. Escape was uncertain, survival was tenuous, and every action carried risk. Streets that had once been avenues of trade and celebration were now traps. Buildings that had offered shelter became tombs. The very air threatened life, laden with ash, dust, and sulfur, yet people continued to move, breathe, and act, clinging to hope, family, and instinct. In the heart of this struggle, Pompeii's humanity shone, even as its fate was being sealed by the unstoppable force of nature. By late afternoon, the citizens of Pompeii were no longer merely panicked. They were facing the full, unimaginable fury of Mount Vesuvius. What had begun as tremors and ashfalls had evolved into a force beyond comprehension. a violent display of nature's power that could not be negotiated with, bargained with, or reasoned with. The mountain, having awakened fully, now unleashed its deadliest weapon, a pyroclastic surge. Unlike the falling stones or drifting pumice that had caused terror and injury, this surge was a moving, rolling tide of superheated gas, ash, and volcanic debris, faster than any human could run and hotter than any natural fire could burn. Its approach was silent at first, almost deceptive in its speed, but those who sensed it, the few who had the presence of mind, felt a pressure in the air, a sudden heat, and a suffocating scent that made the heart race. The initial wave of the surge struck like a tidal wall. It moved with terrifying precision, flowing over streets and hills, crushing buildings and sweeping up anything in its path. The temperature of the gases reached hundreds of degrees, enough to incinerate tissue instantly and collapse lungs the moment they inhaled the thick, searing air. Those caught in its path could not run, could not shield themselves, and could not comprehend the speed or intensity of what approached. The people of Pompeii, who had been running, hiding, and seeking refuge, were now utterly defenseless. The laws of motion and survival no longer applied. Human effort was irrelevant against the force of the pyroclastic flow. The effect on the city was instantaneous and terrifying. Streets that had been clogged with panicked families, animals, and debris were swallowed whole. Roofs, already weakened by pumice, collapsed completely under the intense pressure of the surge. Walls buckled, splintered, or were crushed entirely. People who had huddled in homes or courtyards, believing they were safe, were consumed in moments. The heat was so extreme that the skin blistered, clothing ignited, and the internal organs of those exposed were destroyed in an instant. There was no time for screams, no chance for resistance, only an abrupt, merciless obliteration of life. Even those who had fled to open spaces found little hope. The surge traveled over the countryside surrounding Pompeii, a dense cloud of fire, rock, and ash moving faster than the eye could track. Farmers in the fields were caught mid-task, plowing soil, tending animals, or harvesting grapes. They could see the wave of destruction advancing, but had no chance to escape. Trees were incinerated, animals fled, only to collapse and die moments later. Livestock, birds, and dogs were caught in the relentless tide, their bodies instantly overwhelmed by the superheated gas. In the city, pets chained to posts, dogs left in courtyards, and birds trapped in cages perished with the swiftness of thought itself. The surge was indiscriminate, consuming rich and poor, young and old, noble and slave alike. Within the streets of Pompeii, the scale of death was staggering. Families that had clung together through the chaos of falling pumice were now separated or destroyed in unison. Parents shielding children were instantly consumed, the children's small bodies pressed against them in the final, frozen moment of life. Couples holding hands, seeking comfort, were erased in a single, invisible instant. Individuals who had been running, screaming, or praying moments before were now nothing more than impressions in the ash, their forms captured forever in death's final embrace. The ordinary human sounds that had defined the city, laughter, negotiation, music, gossip, vanished, replaced by a terrifying silence punctuated only by the distant roar of the volcano and the occasional collapse of buildings under the relentless pressure of the surge. The pyroclastic surge moved with a terrifying fluidity, rolling through streets and alleys, filling courtyards, and swallowing public squares. It obeyed no rules of gravity or geometry. It flowed up stairways, through doorways, and over walls as if the city itself were made of nothing but empty channels for its unstoppable path. Air that had once been breathable became a furnace, thick with carbon dioxide, sulfur, and ash, a lethal mixture that rendered lungs useless in seconds. Those exposed to even the edges of the surge could inhale only once before being overcome, their bodies collapsing in place, sometimes contorted in the last instinctive positions of defense or care. The destruction extended to every layer of Pompeii's infrastructure. Public baths, normally filled with citizens enjoying the ritual of bathing, were obliterated. Water basins boiled in the intense heat, floors buckled, and marble statues cracked. Markets and shops were flattened, their roofs gone, their contents scattered and burned. The Forum, center of civic life, became an empty shell as the heat and pressure disintegrated wooden stalls, overturned stone benches, and stripped the buildings of their decorative mosaics. Even the grand villas of the wealthy, with their reinforced walls and gardens, were not spared. Frescoes were scorched, marble shattered, and priceless artifacts buried under tons of ash and debris. The scale of human suffering, while indescribable, left traces that would later be frozen in time. In the immediate aftermath, there was no one to record, no voice to tell the story. Families that had argued over breakfast, lovers who had walked hand in hand through the morning, children chasing pets through the streets, all were gone. Their final moments, often protective or instinctive, left physical impressions in the ash that would later serve as chilling memorials. Arms raised in defense, bodies curled around children, heads turned as if to witness the horror, every gesture preserved as a snapshot of life abruptly ended. These impressions, human yet rendered ghostly by the eruption, would make Pompeii one of the most haunting archaeological sites in history, a city forever frozen by a single catastrophic day. Amid the chaos, the psychological dimension of death was stark. For those who had the fleeting awareness of the surge approaching, there was no time to think beyond a single, desperate instinct: survive. Panic overtook reason. Prayer, hope, and logic were replaced by instantaneous action. Some attempted to run, some sought shelter, some clung to loved ones, and some froze in shock. The moments before death were compressed into a terrifying clarity, a fusion of instinct, fear, and fleeting recognition that life as they knew it was over. Yet the pyroclastic surge allowed no comprehension, no experience beyond the immediate physical obliteration. The atmosphere itself became a weapon. Hot gases moved faster than sound, displacing air, scouring streets, and incinerating everything in their path. Temperatures exceeded 400 degrees Celsius in some areas, enough to instantly kill humans and animals, ignite flammable objects, and fracture stone and marble. Breathing the air was impossible. Lungs could not withstand the heat or toxic gases. Clothing, hair, and skin were vaporized almost instantly, leaving only the impressions in ash that would centuries later give us insight into the final moments of life. The air, previously filled with smoke and the scent of sulfur, now carried the suffocating intensity of death itself. Buildings, overwhelmed by the heat and pressure, collapsed entirely. Roofs caved inward, walls splintered, and marble statues shattered, sending fragments crashing into streets below. Courtyards, once filled with the sound of children playing or water from fountains, became traps. People who had sought shelter within the relative security of homes, shops, or baths were crushed, burned, or suffocated. The structures themselves, so central to the sense of permanence in Pompeii, were transformed into instruments of mortality. Amid the horror, the relentless movement of the surge demonstrated a terrifying precision. It flowed through streets and over obstacles, ignoring walls, gates, and barricades. Open plazas, which might have seemed safe from falling stones or collapsing roofs, were engulfed as if the city were a single organism being consumed. Those who had fled to open ground found themselves unable to avoid the searing cloud that rolled inexorably forward. Fields, orchards, and gardens outside the city walls were no safer, as the pyroclastic surge expanded beyond the urban boundaries, consuming everything in its path. The timing of the disaster compounded its severity. By late afternoon, exhaustion had set in among the survivors. People who had been running, lifting, and shielding others for hours were physically spent, their muscles cramped, their energy sapped, and their judgment clouded by heat and panic. When the surge arrived, even those who might have momentarily perceived a possible escape lacked the physical strength to act. Collapse was instantaneous for many, an abrupt transition from frantic movement to permanent stillness. In the streets, the surge created a landscape of instantaneous death and frozen movement. Families huddled together, arms entwined protectively around children. Couples clutched one another, heads tilted in desperation. Animals previously fleeing were struck down in mid-motion. Pedestrians fell mid-step, merchants mid-bargain, artisans mid-task. Every detail of daily life, previously so ordinary, was now preserved in death, caught by the unyielding hand of the eruption. These moments, captured in ash and later immortalized in plaster, would reveal a city trapped in the final, intimate gestures of humanity. The psychological dimension of witnessing the surge, even briefly, was profound. For those who had glimpsed the wave approaching, the realization of imminent death must have been overwhelming. Fear, shock, and despair compressed time and perception, creating an experience both immediate and eternal. Some may have cried out, others may have clutched loved ones, and some may have attempted to flee one final time, only to find that escape was impossible. The mountain, silent for centuries, had reclaimed its authority, rendering human effort irrelevant. Even sacred and cultural spaces were consumed without mercy. Temples, altars, and shrines, focal points of civic and religious life, were destroyed. Statues of gods, once revered, crumbled under heat and debris. Frescoes on walls, depicting scenes of myth, daily life, and divine intervention, were scorched or buried. Public spaces that had been centers of commerce, debate, and performance, the forum, the baths, the theaters, were flattened or filled with deadly ash. Pompeii's culture, accumulated over centuries, was being erased in hours, leaving only the silent impressions of bodies, the shadowed outlines of buildings, and the scorched remains of objects as evidence of what had once been. The full human toll of the pyroclastic surge cannot be comprehended in numbers alone. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out in moments, with no survivors to recount the events. Individual experiences, frozen in the final seconds of life, were varied yet universally tragic. A mother shielding her child, a father protecting a wife, a merchant clutching his goods, children clutching pets, servants attempting to rescue masters. Every gesture was halted by the surge, leaving an eternal snapshot of humanity caught between life and death. The speed and intensity of the surge made it impossible for rescue or escape. Roads were impassable, streets choked with debris, and the heat and toxic gases ensured that those who attempted flight were quickly overcome. Even the countryside surrounding Pompeii offered no refuge. The surge extended beyond the city walls, enveloping nearby villages, fields, and forests, transforming the landscape into a vast graveyard of life, nature, and civilization alike. The finality of the surge was absolute. Where life had existed just hours earlier, markets bustling, children laughing, families conversing, now remained only ash, rubble, and the impressions of human bodies. The roar of the volcano faded only slightly after the initial surge, replaced by secondary flows, falling debris, and the settling of ash, but the city was already lost. Every street, building, and courtyard bore witness to the eruption's unparalleled power. Pompeii had been transformed from a thriving Roman city into a frozen tableau of death, captured in the last gestures and positions of those who had lived, loved, worked, and played there. By the evening, the city was almost entirely buried. The ash, pumice, and debris continued to fall, layering over streets, rooftops, and open spaces. Smoke and steam rose from heating materials, creating an eerie, otherworldly landscape. The silence that followed the surge was profound, broken only by the occasional collapse of weakened structures or the distant rumble of the volcano. Pompeii, vibrant and alive just hours before, had become a city suspended in a tragic, eternal moment. The human drama, once loud, chaotic, and ordinary, was now frozen, awaiting rediscovery by future generations who would marvel at both the destruction and the intimate details of life halted mid-motion. When the pyroclastic flows had finally ceased, the city of Pompeii was no longer the vibrant hub of life it had been just hours before. The streets, once bustling with merchants, children, and citizens going about their daily routines, were now unrecognizable under layers of ash, pumice, and debris. Buildings that had once displayed wealth, art, and culture were collapsed, obscured, or buried, leaving only the faint outlines of their structures. The plazas, the baths, the theaters, all spaces that had held social, commercial, and religious life, were now silent, shrouded beneath a thick, gray blanket that smothered every trace of movement. Time itself seemed to have been arrested, as though Mount Vesuvius had imposed a cruel pause on history, freezing the city in an eternal twilight of destruction. The first signs of the aftermath were stark in their simplicity. Ash and pumice continued to settle from the sky, forming a heavy layer over streets, homes, and courtyards. The air, once thick with the heat and suffocating gases of the eruption, gradually cleared, revealing a city that was eerily still. No cries echoed through the streets, no movement disturbed the silence. The only sound was the occasional rumble of settling debris, the faint shifting of ash under gravity, and the distant murmur of the mountain, which still seemed to breathe with a latent power. Where life had thrived in chaos just hours earlier, now there remained only stillness, a silent testament to the speed and magnitude of nature's fury. The human cost was beyond imagination. In homes, streets, and courtyards, the people of Pompeii had been caught mid-action, frozen in the moments before death. Fathers shielding children, mothers clinging to infants, couples holding hands. These gestures, once full of hope, love, and instinct, were now rendered eternal in death. Those who had attempted to flee through the streets were halted mid-step, their bodies preserved in contorted positions of panic, struggle, and despair. Some had collapsed near fountains or market stalls, leaving the faint traces of coins or pottery scattered beside them. Others had sought refuge in the relatively sturdy walls of homes or temples, only to be overtaken by the unrelenting surge. Each body became a silent witness to the suddenness and universality of the catastrophe. Yet it was not only the people who were frozen. Animals, too, had been claimed by the eruption. Dogs, cats, livestock, and birds, all caught in the same overwhelming event, were preserved alongside humans, their bodies embedded in the ash. The loyal dog that had raced alongside its master, the flock of sheep startled by the heat and speed of the surge, and the household cats seeking hiding places, all were captured in their final moments, becoming part of the eerie tableau that Pompeii would later reveal. Even pets chained in courtyards or perched on rooftops were immobilized, their fear and instinct encoded in the impressions left behind. The city had become a museum of instantaneous death, preserving both the ordinary and the extraordinary in tragic detail. The ash that buried the city played a paradoxical role. While it caused suffocation and death, it also acted as a protective layer, shielding what remained from immediate decay. Buildings that had survived the collapse of roofs or walls were encased, their frescoes, mosaics, and structural elements preserved beneath a thick covering of pumice. Wooden objects, furniture, and even delicate household items were buried in layers that prevented complete decomposition. The streets, though impassable at first, were protected beneath the ash, preserving the layout, the paving stones, and even the imprints of human and animal footprints. Nature, in its destructive capacity, had simultaneously become a custodian of history. Among the most haunting aspects of the aftermath were the voids left by human bodies in the hardened ash. As centuries passed, these voids, which formed when bodies decomposed within the compacted material, became remarkable evidence of the final moments of life. Archaeologists, centuries later, would pour plaster into these cavities, creating casts that revealed the exact positions and expressions of the people of Pompeii in their last moments. The mother clutching her child, the couple reaching for one another, the man shielding his face from the oncoming surge. These casts conveyed the terror, desperation, and humanity of the victims with an intensity no written account could match. In a way, Pompeii was not only a city of the past, but a city of the frozen present, capturing life in its final, intimate details. The city's infrastructure, once a symbol of Roman order and ingenuity, was transformed into a tableau of destruction and preservation. Streets clogged with debris, yet intact in layout, revealed the careful planning of urban life. Villas with courtyards, fountains, and mosaics were buried, but remained largely recognizable beneath the ash. Public baths, though damaged, retained the outlines of pools, changing rooms, and intricate decorations. The Forum, the heart of civic and religious life, lay under meters of pumice, yet the alignment of columns, the steps leading to temples, and the bas reliefs on walls were preserved. The eruption had erased the daily rhythms of life, but it had also captured them in a state of eerie suspension. In the aftermath, the psychological impact of the city's sudden silence was profound. Where once there had been vibrant noise, children playing, merchants haggling, priests chanting, there was now nothing but stillness. The city had become a tomb, yet it was a tomb of remarkable clarity. Future generations would walk its streets and see the layout, understand the culture, and witness the intimate details of Roman life, all because the ash had acted as both executioner and archivist. The houses, streets, and public spaces, though no longer alive, offered a window into everyday life, preserved with uncanny accuracy. The cultural and religious aspects of Pompeii were likewise preserved. Temples, shrines, and altars, though damaged, were buried beneath the ash, keeping intact their mosaics, statues, and inscriptions. Frescoes on walls depicting gods, myths, and scenes of daily life were protected from the elements, allowing future generations to study Roman art and iconography. Household shrines with offerings to lares and penates were preserved alongside furniture, cooking utensils, and personal items, revealing the intimate rituals that defined Roman domestic life. In death, the culture of Pompeii became frozen, waiting to be rediscovered in full detail. The preservation extended to daily objects. Pottery, amphorae, cooking vessels, tools, and furniture were buried under ash, keeping their forms intact for centuries. Food, such as grains, fruits, and olives, was carbonized but preserved, offering insights into Roman diet and trade. Clothing, jewelry, and personal adornments were encased, allowing archaeologists to understand fashion, social status, and wealth. Even graffiti scratched into walls survived, revealing thoughts, jokes, and warnings left by the citizens in the final days before the eruption. Every item, ordinary or extraordinary, contributed to the city's status as a unique archaeological time capsule. Despite the death and destruction, Pompeii was not entirely uniform in its devastation. Some areas were more heavily buried, preserving the dead in remarkable detail, while other parts saw partial destruction, leaving glimpses of collapsed walls and scattered debris. The varying thickness of ash deposits created a stratified record, revealing the sequence of events during the eruption. Archaeologists, centuries later, would use this stratigraphy to reconstruct the timeline, the path of pyroclastic flows, and the human responses to the disaster. The city's destruction, though catastrophic, became a detailed narrative written in stone, ash, and voids where human life had once been. The haunting presence of human casts in Pompeii has made the city a symbol of life frozen at the moment of death. Fathers shielding children, mothers clinging to infants, lovers entwined, merchants grasping coins or jars. Each cast conveys a story, a final gesture that speaks across millennia. The detail is so profound that expressions of terror, despair, and instinctive protection are visible in many casts. The positions of bodies, sometimes curled, sometimes outstretched, reveal the panic and attempts at survival. These silent witnesses offer an unparalleled connection to the past, allowing modern viewers to glimpse the humanity of a city that was destroyed in an instant. The aftermath of the eruption also left a profound natural landscape. The surrounding countryside was blanketed in ash, forests and farmland destroyed, rivers clogged with pumice, and the shoreline of the Bay of Naples coated in debris. Livelihoods outside the city were obliterated along with the urban environment. Vineyards, olive groves, and farms were buried, leaving the regional economy devastated. The sheer scale of destruction extended beyond human settlements, affecting the environment itself, yet preserving it in a way that would allow historians to study agricultural practices, landscape management, and human interaction with nature in the Roman era. In the centuries following the eruption, Pompeii lay buried and largely forgotten beneath meters of ash and pumice. The natural preservation was so effective that, when rediscovered, the city provided an extraordinary record of Roman life. Streets, buildings, art, and human remains offered insights that could never have been gleaned from texts alone. The combination of rapid burial, protection from the elements, and the exceptional nature of the eruption created a perfect archaeological record, a city frozen not only in space, but also in human experience. The human story of Pompeii's aftermath is inseparable from its preservation. The immediacy of death, the suddenness of the event, and the detailed impressions left in ash allow modern observers to experience history not as abstract, but as intimate, visceral, and profoundly human. The gestures, positions, and final acts of the city's citizens, protecting loved ones, attempting escape, or simply caught unaware, form a silent narrative, conveying fear, love, desperation, and instinct in ways that words or written records alone could never accomplish. Pompeii, in its frozen aftermath, became a city both destroyed and immortalized. The eruption had ended life in an instant, yet it had created a record of life so detailed that every alley, home, and plaza tells a story. The city's destruction was total, yet through that very destruction, Pompeii achieved a kind of immortality, preserving the ordinary and extraordinary moments of human existence with an accuracy unmatched in the ancient world. Even today, as archaeologists uncover streets, homes, and human casts, the city speaks across time. The ash and pumice, once instruments of death, now serve as protectors of memory. Frescoes, mosaics, inscriptions, and everyday objects reveal not only the scale of the disaster, but also the details of daily life, commerce, religion, and culture. The preserved city provides a window into the human experience, illustrating the ordinary lives that were interrupted so suddenly, yet remembered so profoundly. Pompeii's aftermath is not merely a story of destruction. It is a story of preservation, memory, and humanity. The city stands as a silent witness to the fragility of life, the power of nature, and the endurance of cultural memory. Its streets, houses, and human casts allow us to witness a day that ended abruptly yet continues to speak across centuries. Through the frozen forms of its citizens, the collapsed and buried architecture, and the preserved artifacts, Pompeii tells the story of human resilience, fear, love, and ordinary life interrupted by extraordinary catastrophe. Centuries passed after the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, leaving Pompeii buried under layers of ash and pumice, forgotten by the world above. The city, once a bustling center of Roman life, remained silent, preserved in the moments before destruction. Over time, the memory of Pompeii faded from the collective consciousness, remembered only in scattered writings by Roman historians and travelers' tales. Yet beneath the earth, the city lay frozen, a time capsule of human existence, waiting for the hand of discovery to awaken it from its long slumber. The rediscovery of Pompeii began in earnest in the 16th century, when workers digging a well near the Sarno River stumbled upon fragments of walls and artifacts buried beneath the soil. Initial interest was limited, and much of what was found was taken for personal collections or repurposed, but the seed of curiosity had been planted. Scholars and travelers heard of a city buried in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, a place where time had stopped, preserving both tragedy and daily life in a way no other site could. The concept was extraordinary. Here was a city not erased by memory, not destroyed in legend, but physically frozen in history, waiting for the modern world to uncover it. Systematic excavations began in the mid-18th century under the Bourbon kings of Naples, and the full significance of Pompeii slowly became apparent. As workers and archaeologists unearthed streets, houses, public buildings, and temples, the city revealed itself layer by layer. The ash and pumice, once instruments of death, had acted as protectors of memory, shielding walls, frescoes, mosaics, and human remains from the erosion of centuries. Each discovery was like opening a window into a world long vanished. The colors of murals, the delicate designs of pottery, and the inscriptions of everyday life all survived in remarkable detail. Scholars began to understand the scale and complexity of Pompeii, its social hierarchy, urban planning, and daily routines, all preserved in a city that seemed to have been paused in mid-moment. Among the most haunting discoveries were the human casts. Archaeologists realized that as bodies decomposed in the hardened ash, they left voids in the sediment. By pouring plaster into these cavities, they could recreate the shapes, postures, and final gestures of Pompeii's citizens. These casts revealed intimate and terrifying details: a father shielding his children, a mother clutching an infant, a couple frozen in embrace. Some appeared to be fleeing, arms outstretched, while others were crouched in terror or collapsed in exhaustion. Each cast told a story, offering an unparalleled window into the human experience of disaster, capturing fear, love, instinct, and desperation in a single frozen instant. The city itself